Hi guys, welcome back to part 3 of this series called Postman Clone, where we're trying to build a Postman clone inside of Ignition so we can use it in our sessions and in our projects. In this video, we're going to style the tables that are in the center of our view. I have my designer opened, and I'll show you what I mean here. So we have a view called Request, and then in the middle of this view, we have this Params, headers, and body tab container. If you ever used Postman, let me open it up here. And if you've ever used Postman, then you might be familiar with this interface here. And there's this table, there's this tab container with a table looking structure. So this is what we're trying to recreate, just so we know where we're headed. And in the last video, we left off with the tables looking like this. So in this video, we're going to add some more formatting so it looks a lot nicer by the time we're done, in my opinion. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I'm going to select the table here in my project browser, and I have these 3 rows. It's difficult to know what to do in what order, so I'm just going to do things in the order I remember to do them. First of all, I want to add, I think I'm going to enable the header. We're going to change how it looks. We're going to format it a little bit better. I don't like how it looks by default. So we'll enable the header. We'll disable row selection because when it's enabled, so let me enable that again. You can select the row, and it also selects a column here. Wherever the border is, we're going to change that. So let me disable row selection, and then you see that nothing happens when let me just check one thing. Yeah, nothing happens when I click on a row. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our column objects. We're going to have 5 columns. So I just closed Postman, but let me open it back up. If you've used Postman, like I said, we have our key, value, description, and then we're going to have a column for this enable and disable feature. And then we're going to have a column. We're going to have a feature where you can delete the row by clicking the little X. So we'll have that also as a column. So in all, we're going to have 5 columns. So we can call this one checked, key, value, description, and then close or delete, whatever we want to call that column. Okay, so let me go to my table column objects. So here, by default, you won't have any. It'll just try to decipher your columns from your data set. But then we can add these column objects, and you specify these values here. So the key, city, will be one of our fields if that's what we wanted to keep. But remember, we want checked. That'll be the first one. Let's add another column and call this one key. Hopefully there's no key sounds like a keyword or like a reserved word, so hopefully we don't have any interruptions there. So I added value and then description, and then my last field will be here. I'll call it delete. You can call it whatever you want. And then let's go back to my I'm going to go back to my actual data set here. I can't think and talk at the same time, so forgive me if I'm a little slow. And here we'll call this one key, and the key will be, for example, API key. That's a pretty common key. And then this key will be called value, and we can just put in a sample API key. My boss this past weekend took my keyboard, and I came back, and I knew right away something felt different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So I ended up going to Walmart to buy myself a new keyboard so I can do my job. And I ended up installing the drivers, whatever else, and the Y key and the semicolon didn't work even after rebooting, installing drivers. So I went back to Walmart and bought myself another keyboard. a more expensive one, and that one is actually really nice. I like using it. I enjoy using it. So we'll see how long it lasts. Maybe it'll even usurp my handy dandy Dell keyboard that I love. Okay, anyway, while I was talking, I added these 5 columns, and I'm going to just copy that row and paste it over the other ones. That way I don't have to change all of them, and you'll see that it looks... So render is set to auto here. I was wondering why it was rendering as a text, or actually as a checkbox. You see in my column here it's set to auto. We're actually, the reason why I don't want to keep it this way, I guess I'll show you why. If we want to set this column to be editable, so right now you can't edit it. However, if we set this column to be editable here, now you can edit it, but you can see that the behavior is kind of janky if the row is not in focus. And first of all, we have this border here that you can't really get rid of. At least I didn't find a way. So we're going to add some custom CSS and get rid of this column border here, the selection or cell selection border. But you can see that when I click one time, even though here, where's my cells? Cell object, allow edit on single click. Even though I click single click, it doesn't work. So I actually have to double click, and it just doesn't work very well. So we're going to actually do it a different way. Let's instead, what we will do is we will create another view. Inside my embedded folder, I'm going to create another view, and I'll call this one here checkbox. And in this case, it doesn't really matter if it's a coordinate container. I'm still going to create it as a flex container. No URL will be necessary. And then in here, we can make it pretty small. So like maybe 40 by 40. And then in my container, I'm going to drag on a checkbox. Drag on to the container. Okay, and then I'll remove the text. So it's just a checkbox here. And then you can see it's just a regular checkbox. And I'm going to go back to my view here, and in my table, let me set this column, the first column, the checked column, to render a view. And then let's specify, you see that after I changed it from auto to view, a couple of my properties here changed. So let me set my view path here to be checkbox. And you can see that it works. Oh, after we do that, this was actually made my brain hurt a little bit, and I can figure out why this was happening. But after we do that, turn editable off, because the editing is not happening on the table cell. It's happening on the view we're embedding, and we're not actually editing the actual table cell. So now we have a much better behavior, in my opinion. Here you can see that it works a lot better, a lot more like we would expect. Let's also set my header values here. So for my first and my last column, I'm going to just put in a space for the title, and I'm going to set sortable to false, and also set resizable to false, and I'm going to enable strict width and set this to 40. That looks fine. That looks fine. Okay, for the second column, we're going to, the field is key, but we can actually change what it displays here. We're going to enter key, also set sortable to off, that way we don't get those arrows. And then for my third column, I'm going to do the same thing, turn off sortable, change my header text to value, just to match my Postman here, key, value, and description. Okay, and then we can go back to my fourth column, description, set the header here to description, and turn off resizable. And then for delete, we're going to do something similar like we did for the checkbox. We're actually going to embed another view. So let me save this actually, and let me launch this into a session here, and you can see that this is what my view looks like so far with our changes. And you can see that these tables are actually, they're the exact same table that we had in the beginning with the first one. Okay, so now I just wanted to show you there the progress we're making. Inside embedded, let's create another view, and we can call this delete. It's going to be a similar, oops, I created it as a coordinate container. Let me delete this and just create it as a flex, although in this case it doesn't really matter because it's going to be another tiny little view. But I just want to make everything a flex container because I like flex containers. Okay, let's set the width and the height to 40 as well. Let's deep select the root container, and then here let's drag on an icon. And then let's click on the icon in the project browser, and then for the icon I want to look for a close icon, so just an X or something like this here. And for color, I want to set this to a grayish color, so I know that ignition or perspective ships with different colors set as variables, and I know that neutral 50, let's see, maybe even a little bit lighter 40. Okay, let's see how that looks like. And then we'll also set it to fill here. That way it fills the entire box. Okay, and now let's go back to our request view here, and then we'll go to our fifth column object on our table, and let's also render this as a view, and then set the view path here to delete. And you can see here's our view here. It looks kind of janky in my opinion. We're going to turn sortable off, resizable off. We're going to set strict width to 40. And set it, enable strict width. We're going to go to the header, and here just put in a space, that way it effectively clears it. So this is what we have so far. I don't like the look of this big X. If you look in Postman, it's pretty tiny. So I'm going to go back to my delete view, and on the root container, I'm going to add padding. I'll add 10 pixels. Let's see how that looks like. Let's go back to my request. It's a lot smaller. I could also add, so let me add maybe 12 pixels, and I think that'll be fine. I also want to add right away, so you can see that when I hover over the X, nothing happens. I want to get a cursor. I want to get a pointer cursor. So let me add a style cursor pointer. That way now when I hover over it, I get the pointer cursor, so it looks like a button. And let's go back to our request and see what it looks like now. And we have this looking view. So we have pointer here. We have pointer here. So right now the buttons don't do anything. Right now these fields are not editable. They will be by the end of this video. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we want to tie. So if you look inside of our data set here, you can see that whenever we check this value here, nothing actually happens. And when we check this value here on the data set, so when we check the value inside of the column, so inside this cell actually, when we check it, we see that nothing actually changes in the data set. And then when we check it in the data set, nothing actually changes. It's not changing what it's rendering here. So we're going to change that. The first thing we're going to do is, let's go back down to our column here, and inside of our view params, they're not listed here, but internally, perspective is passing in two parameters that I know of. I can't find the documentation on this. One is called row index. The other is called value. It's passing the actual cell value into the embedded view, or inside the view that's inside the cell that's rendered as a view. So if we go to our checkbox here, we can add, let me shrink this here. We can add row index. This will tell us the index of the row that the click is coming from, and then also value. So then let's go to our checkbox and just add an onActionPerform script, and then try to system.perspective.print, and then we can print params row index. This is an integer, so I'm going to cast it to a string, and then a space, and then print another. So let me actually make this bigger. There we go. And then we add my value, and then you'll see that it's actually passing in the values. Let me save here, and let me go back to my session. And then if I open up the console, I should be able to see that whenever I click here, it'll tell me the row index, and it'll tell me the value here. So I click this again, it's still passing in false, even though my checkbox is being checked, because the actual underlying data set's not changing. Okay, so we're going to eventually end up doing the same thing for the delete button. That way, whenever we click this, the row actually gets deleted. But let's finish up our checkbox here. So back to our table, on our column. Hopefully the sound is all right on this video, because lately my microphone has been giving me issues. Okay, on our column here, we're going to pass, so two values are already being passed in, even though we're not passing in anything here. So I forgot where we left off here. Okay, so we're passing in here, but now that we added those two view params, actually there's another thing we have to do, and I don't know why I can't speak right now. Let's go back to our checkbox. So after we pass in value as a parameter, we're going to bind our checkbox value. This selected, we'll bind it to the parameter that we passed in, value. There we go. And as you can see here, so after we do that, we can check in the data set, and now it actually updates. So when we're changing the value in the data set, it actually updates what is displayed, but not the other way around. So if I check it here, nothing actually happens. So to get this to work, we're going to need to use a message handler. By design, it should work. If you use a bidirectional, there might be another way to do this, but this is the only way I found that actually works. We're going to need it to add a message handler on our table. We can do that now, and then add the actual sending message. So let's actually do it this way. It'll make more sense here. So we're going to name this message handler cell change, or change cell. It'll be on a page scope. If it was on a view scope, you're not going to get anything because it's actually a different view. So it needs to be on a page scope here. We're going to accept 3 parameters, or we're going to accept 3 values in the payload. We're going to accept the column, well, the row, column. Oh, so let me actually zoom in here. A couple things. Row will equal payload, row, and then column will equal the same thing, column, and then our value is going to equal the same thing, value. So we're passing in a row, we're passing in a column. This is to tell us which cell we're editing. So, and then we're also passing in the value. The value in this case will be true or false, whether it's true or whether it's false, whether it's selected or not selected. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to to take our props data at this row and at this column, and we're going to set it to value, just like that. This won't make sense until we actually send the message here. Let me take a screenshot of this. That way we can refer to this later. Okay, so let me save this, hit OK. We called it change cell. Okay, now let's go back to our checkbox. And then let's add a script on the checkbox, configure events. We started writing we just wrote a print statement here. So instead of doing a print statement, we're going to actually bring our row value, our column value, and then our value. So remember our structure of our message handler. So we have a row, column, and a value for our payload. In this case, we're going to have the row will be a row index. So remember we added a parameter row index here. Our column will be a column name. So this will also be a parameter. Let's go ahead and add that now. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm just remembering things to do and doing them right away. So let's add a parameter here on our columns. On our first column, let's add a view param. So we already have two. If you add one, you can see row index and value are already added. We don't need to add those, but let's also add column, and we'll call it checked. That's the column name. So you actually don't need an index here, you need the column name here. And if you copy this data property here, copy and paste it into a text editor, you'll see why. So we have our overall list, and then we have items in the list, and then we have key and value pairs. So if you used 0, you would either get some invalid, you would get something invalid, or you'd get like something you don't expect, like this quotation mark. So that is why we pass in the column name. The column name is so we know which column we're modifying. The row index is so we know which row, so we can know exactly which one of these to modify here. Hopefully it'll make sense here. So let's go back. So just to recap what we just did. On our column 0, we're going to pass in one parameter besides the two that are already passed in, checked. That corresponds to this checked field here, and also this field checked here. We're just going to pass that in, and then go back here, go back to our event here, and now we can pass in self view params. Oh, we didn't add it here yet, sorry. Let's go back here, add a view param, and call it call. And then we can go to our checkbox. Finally, let's go to our params, go to our column. Our value here, we're just going to take our current value. So our current value will come from this, will come from the binding, not from the actual checkbox itself. So not from props selected, but from the actual value that's being passed in from the row. Okay, now we're going to use a message handler. We're going to send the message system.perspective.send message. We're going to pass in the message name, message type, I believe that's what it's called, change cell, change cell, and then we're going to specify a payload. Payload is equal to row will equal our row, column will equal our column, and I believe we called it val. Val will equal val. Will actually equal not val. So let me actually think through this here. Okay. Yeah, so valid will be the opposite of what it is currently. We're going to negate it, and that's going to give us the opposite. So if there's only two options, true, false, if the current value is true and you negate it, it becomes false. I think that's self-explanatory. Okay, so this is our message here. Let me make it larger. We're getting our row index, we're getting our column name, we're getting our current value, and then we're sending a message to change cell. The listener is on the table, remember. We're passing in our row, our column, and negating our value. Okay, so now when we go back to request, and when we hit play, let me actually select my table in the project browser and open here. When I check and uncheck, you can see that the actual underlying data set is changing as well. So we have a few things left to do. Well, quite a bit of things, but we're plowing right along, so we'll get through this. Okay, so now I think the most difficult part is done. We tied our checkbox, which is a view inside of our cell, and you can see that the actual underlying data set is changing, which is what we need when we actually use the URL parameters here, or the headers, or the body. It'll need to, the actual underlying data set is what we'll be looking at in our script, not what it looks like on the view. So the data set needs to change, and we have it changing here. So that's good. Another thing we need is we want our key, value, and description cell columns, those cells to also be editable. If you look inside Postman, it's actually pretty cool. So when I click on it, I get this nice border, and I can see that the cell is in focus, and I can add in a value in there. So we're going to try to mimic this. I'm going to fix a few small things that are bothering me. The rows look too big, so I'm going to shrink them here. Height, set them to 40. Maybe that's how 40 pixels. Okay. I'm also going to turn striped off. So we just have one color. How tall should I make it? 20. Okay. Anyway, we play around with that. And the other thing I wanted to do was to get rid of this blue color. I don't like this blue color. I want to set it to something more neutral. So I'm going to set my checked, unchecked, and undeterminate icon color to a color here, a variable, probably neutral 50. So let me paste this here, and checked, unchecked, enabled, and undeterminate, paste it here. Let me see how it looks now. So you can see that it looks a lot better in my opinion. So when we go back to request, we can also see that we don't get that blue color. So I think it looks better without the blue. In this case, we're trying to go for minimal colors, and the colors we do use are for important actions like sending the request. Okay, so let's continue along. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the key, value, and description columns editable. That should be pretty easy. Let's just go to the key field, or the key column, set it to editable here, and then you can see that when I go here, I can enter text, but nothing actually happens. The underlying data set, once again, doesn't get changed. If you go to the first row, when I'm entering text and when I commit it, nothing changes here for a key. So we're going to have to add an event. There's an event on the table called onEditCellCommit. And inside this, we're going to bind our table props data here at a certain row. Which row? Well, event.row, whichever cell is triggering this editCellCommit event, and then event.column will equal. So this is the position, this is positional data, and then we're going to set it equal to event.value, the value that's in the cell when we're committing it. So now let me zoom in here so you can get this self props data. This is our data, the table that we're modifying here. Event.row is event row. Event.column is the same thing. So this is an index or a string here, and then it'll equal the value, the committed value here. So you can see now when I edit this and change it to something else, you can see that I don't know how to spell. Let's go back to my event here and fix this. Instead of call, it's column. You can see now when I commit it, it actually changes the cell value, so it doesn't matter where. API key, and it changes. Okay, so that's it for this cell. Now let's also change our third and fourth columns. So our value column, we'll also set it to editable, and our description column we'll set to editable. Let's just double check that we can modify this. There we go. And that works just like we wanted it to. Okay, so moving right along here, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to, whenever we press this button here, we're going to delete that row. So we're going to have to do something similar. So on our last column, on our fifth column here, the table's already passing in view, already passing in value and row index. So we need to go to our delete view, which is just this button, and then add 2 row parameters. So row index, and we're going to pass in value. This is the value of the row. In this case, it doesn't even matter what the value is. We don't really even need to pass it in, I don't think. Yeah, we can delete that. All we need is the row index to know which row we're going to delete. Okay, so after we pass in the row index, we're going to do something very similar. Let's go back to our table and add a message handler, and this handler we're going to call delete row. Delete row. It'll be a page listen scope once again, just because the delete view is a different view. So if it's set to view, nothing will actually happen, I don't think, anyway. So we're going to, our row will equal payload row. How do I know this? Well, because I'm going to be the one writing the script to send the actual payload. So right now this payload row doesn't even exist. I just know that I'm going to call it row. And then what we're going to do is delete. What are we going to delete? Well, we're going to delete our table props data at index row. We're going to delete the table props data at index row. This should be enough to accomplish the behavior we want. Okay, now let's go to the actual icon on our different view, on our delete view on the icon. And actually, I realized something just now. When we set padding on the root container, our select area is now much smaller. So let me actually fix this. Let me set this padding on the actual icon itself. Padding, so 12 pixels. And now let's configure event. So on click, whenever we click the icon, we're going to send a message. System.perspective.send message. Remember, we called it delete row, I believe. And our payload will equal row. That's what we called it. And then inside here, we're going to pass in our parameters row index, just like that. Now we know when we send our message to the table knows which row to actually delete. So if we go back to our request here, you can see that I can do this still, but when I hit this, the row disappears. It deletes itself. And you can see that the actual underlying data set changed here. So now when we save this, okay, you see that when I delete it, it disappears. And then the only way to make it reappear, is to save over the top. So I mean, like for example, this, save this once again, and go back, and we'll have our 2 rows again. So you can see that it's actually deleting. It's deleting the row from the data set. So this is very useful. We are almost done. So that's the good news. We're almost done. The last things we're going to do are mostly style things. And for this, you will need some CSS that I already pre-wrote. You can find it on my gist, which will be linked in the description of this video. Inside this file here, I have some CSS declarations, basically to style our table to look and behave like, well, mostly to look, that's what CSS deals with, to look like this table here. Okay. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is copy this file here. So copy all of this file. And this part will be useful for any of you who haven't added custom CSS files and maybe you wanted to. What you're going to do is you're going to go on the computer that the Ignition gateway is installed on. For me, I'm running Maker on my own local machine. And I installed it in the default location. So that's C, Program Files, Inductive Automation, as you can see. And then let's browse to Ignition. You can see the path here in the top as I'm browsing. Data, modules, perspective, themes, and then inside this folder here, you see that you can see all of the theme entry point files and also the directories that hold the actual CSS all in this file. We're going to create this light Postman file here, but let me delete this and start from scratch. There you go. So just to explain how all of this works, if you go back to your designer, if you go to the session properties, you can set the theme for the session. So here right now it's set to light. There's obviously dark and other themes that you can add on your own. So since it's set to light, the entry point for this theme is this light.css file. If you open it, I like opening it in Notepad++ because I can launch as an administrator and actually save the file. So here's what light.css looks like, except if it's a default installation for you, you're not going to see this line here. You'll just see that it's importing light index.css. Import just basically tells Perspective or the web server that's running Perspective where it can find CSS files for the light theme, which is inside this folder here. And then index.css is this file. And then if you look in this file, you can just drill down deeper. It's importing other files, so variables, fonts, globals, and then inside app, inside each of these directories is another index.css. We don't need to know any of this. All we need to know is that whenever we make changes in these directories, the ones that come with the default Ignition installation, they'll be overwritten whenever we restart our gateway or whenever we upgrade a version. But whenever we make changes to these entry point files, they will not be overwritten. So that is why, as you saw in my light.css, let me go back here and open light.css once again. And you can see that that's why I added my custom CSS import here. Also, there's many different ways to add custom CSS. You could create your own theme and extend a light or a dark theme, but this is the way we're going to do it. I don't know why I can't speak right now. Okay, so let's add some structure in our Perspective themes folder. Inside, let's create a new folder, and we'll call it light Postman, so what I had earlier. Inside here, let's create a new, let's actually copy one of these files. It's not letting me, so I'm just going to copy this file and then go to light Postman, paste it here, and then I'm just going to override it and save. So I don't like Windows 11. It looks kind of tacky in my opinion. So let me open here, edit with Notepad++. Where is it? Close. Edit with Notepad++. And instead of dark CSS, we're going to paste in our gist here. So this is just some CSS that I already pre-wrote. It's just a lot of trial and error with the dev tools in the browser, but we're going to copy this, paste it in here, and you can see that if your language is set in Notepad++ or if you have the extension or the plugin in Visual Studio Code, it'll add highlighting for you. After you do this, after you paste it in the file, let's save. It's going to launch in administrator mode. I'm going to give it permission. We're going to go ahead and hit save. I'm going to rename my file here. Instead of dark CSS, since now we're in my own custom folder, it doesn't really matter what it is here, but I'm just going to rename it index.css, continue, and then save. So now, as I was saying, light.css is the entry point. So now we want to make Perspective, the web server, aware of our additional CSS file, which is in light Postman here, this file. So all we need to do is go into light CSS and add one line of CSS code. Okay, we're going to add one line of CSS code here, and all it's going to say is @import, just exactly like the line above it. And you have to follow a pretty strict format here. So custom table, so custom is this folder. We called our folder light Postman, so we can call it light Postman, and then we called it index.css, just like that. All right, when you save here, if you're running a current version, your gateway is going to pick up the changes pretty quickly. So but you also may need to hit this merge changes here, file, update project here, or you can hit this button, and then you may need to close the view that the style is going to be applied to, and reopen it to actually see the style applied. Nothing actually changed in our view. Why? Because we didn't actually use our custom CSS, but at this point we will. So we're going to click our table here, table params, and let's go down to style, and you can see inside my file here. Let me reopen it once again. Let me reopen light postman index.css. The name changed, so it was asking me if I wanted to close all windows. This is going to be a very long video, and I apologize in advance. So you can see my class is called Postman Table. If you don't understand what any of this means, I have a video that goes in depth on custom CSS. So I'm just going to add Postman Table as a style class on my table, just like this, Postman Table. The PSC and the dash get appended on their own. So now you can see that right away the look of my table changed. And now when I click, it behaves differently than it would by default. There's no border like there would be by default, so it behaves differently. The last thing I think we want to do in this video is to set the row height. It looks too tall for my liking. If I can figure out how to do this. Height. Oh, I think I know why. It's it's taking in the height of my sub view. So if I go to delete here and set the height here to 20, or 30. Actually, let's just keep it at 40. It's okay. We'll fix this later. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover in this video. Just to recap, we learned how to pass in values into views that are embedded in our cells, in our table cells. We learned how to send messages from those views back into our main cell or main view, in this case to our table, so that way we can delete rows. We learned, sorry, let me just do this real quick. We learned how to make cells editable. We learned how to use custom CSS. And now, so you can see what we started, the table we started off with and the table we have now. It looks a lot closer to the Postman table. Maybe for the next video, I'll actually add these lines back in. So I don't have them in my version here. But that's about all I had for you guys today. I apologize that it took me so long to get this video out. You all know how it is. Life just gets in the way. Anyways, I thank you for watching this video and for being active in the Discord and for following my channel and my videos. I will see you guys real soon in another video.